Right, it's 10 o'clock just gone, and we welcome Joan to Ignition Radio. Very good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for taking time out to come to Ignition Radio this morning. Now we're talking poetry, the prose, the writing, the language, the English language. Such a fantastic language, isn't it, really?
It is, it's wonderful. And I think one of the things that people don't possibly appreciate, Clive, is that we have so many words with different nuances to the same meaning. So, you know, it's in a very simple way. It's like saying something is nice, something is pretty, something is lovely, something is beautiful. We have a range of words that can say the same thing to a different degree. And that's why English poetry is so beautiful, because one word will be okay, but another one will be absolutely right. And when you get it right and it works, it's lovely.
And of course, the English language can evoke so many emotions: love, hate, happiness. The English dictionary, of course, it's always adding words every year to the English dictionary book. And you see some of the words and you think, crikey, how did those type of words get into the English language?
Yeah, that's right. It's a very dynamic language, and some of the things that we'd never heard of, and again, in a very simple way, going back 30 or 40 years, there was no form of words for computers, hard drive and this kind of thing, Intel and the rest of it. They're all new words because of technology. It's a dynamic language that's always changing. And one of the things that happens is, as well, because over thousands and thousands of years we've had many immigrants in the country, and we've adopted our language. So we have words from the Indian language like bungalow and khaki, and we've got words from the Nordic language such as ski, and lots of things, French language, beautiful. The B-E-A-U spelling is actually French, it's beau.
Wow.
So lots of language comes from other countries, and we've adopted them as our language.
Now, do you think with the progression of social media that the sort of written word has sort of taken a second sort of sidestep, do you think?
Well, this is a debate that's been going on for quite a few years, as I'm sure you know. I'm one of these people who writes text messages in full, including the punctuation and apostrophes. I'm sorry, I apologise now to everybody. But because I teach English as well, I can't bring myself to actually write the shortened words. I've read a couple of research papers which have said that young people's English language is developing very much in the same way that the language is changing. The written word is changing by the use of shortened text form. Now, it's not acceptable, obviously, in school and for examinations, but it's a form of written language just the same. And we now do get some forms of poems and things in those kinds of forms, although I have to say I've never read much of it. I've only heard about it.
Right.
So that's an interesting aspect to it as well.
Do you think as well the fact that the English language grows and grows and grows, that you see some of the words and you think, crikey, they're so abstract that they end up as everyday speech, I suppose?
Yeah, they do in a way, but I think what happens as well that we don't notice is that certain words go out of use. They're not fashionable anymore. And I can't off the top of my head think of a for instance now, but if you go back to the archaic Shakespeare language, and even some of the Victorian literature, the way that they constructed their sentences is very different to the way that we construct it now. So, for instance, we would say to somebody, "Are you going to the shops with me?" In Victorian language, they would say, "Please accompany me to the store."
Right.
So it would be a very different way of saying the words that mean the same thing. And again, it might be a slightly different sentence structure in that sense. So, yes, it's changing all of the time.
Yeah, and of course, with this fast, modern-paced world that we live in, it's so easy to lose the traditional format with English language, isn't it? I mean, it can disappear quite quickly.
Yeah, quite a lot of people complain about young people's grammar and punctuation these days. And as a teacher, that's something that is concerning. But it's always been taught in a formal way. And I just think, again, it's a change in language. There is a movement to actually get rid of all forms of punctuation.
Right.
However, I think that would be a great mistake, because the expression when you're reading and understanding comes partly from the punctuation, not only from the words. And one of the classic examples is about... It's a poem that you can find online, and it's about a woman writing to her boyfriend about needing a man. And the way the punctuation is separated, I don't have it on me, Clive, I'm sorry, I didn't know we were going to talk about this. But if you actually look it up online, it's actually two very different ways of writing it, and one form is very funny. It's about how she can't live without her man. The second one is actually that she doesn't need him, and the words are exactly the same. The only difference is where the punctuation is placed. Right. And that's a really, really good example we use in our classes, you know. Now, it's very interesting.
Now, you see, of course, the traditional four-line verse, you know, which usually rhymes. But now, I think with modern poetry coming in, that you see that it doesn't have to necessarily rhyme, does it?
No, modern poetry most of the time doesn't rhyme, unless you want to make it amusing or funny, or the rhyme is there for a particular reason. One of the reasons for not necessarily making a poem rhyme is because you can sometimes fit a word in that's a bit contrived. It's not exactly, as I was saying earlier on about the perfect word, it's not the perfect word, it simply rhymes. Now, a lot of Victorian and older poets were very good at that, but the modern movement is not necessarily to write a poem that rhymes, but write a poem that means something. And it's much more, the depth of meaning is much greater. So each line will have its own rhythm, and it will have to fit in with the rhythm above and below. So it might be slightly longer or slightly shorter, but it will still fit with the overall rhythm. Right. And it's a bit like the old, when we think of poetry, we think of the di-da, 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 exactly, yeah. Di-da, di-da, di-da. And as long as it's got some form of rhythm, and you can read it with rhythm, then it will be right.
Now, you specialise in Victorian prose.
Not really. I think mine's inspired by Victorian prose more than anything. I do write fairly modern poetry. In fact, in the sense that it doesn't rhyme always. I've done a couple of amusing ones which rhyme, but amusing poetry is very difficult to write.
Right.
But yeah, it doesn't normally rhyme. It's just inspired by the Romantic style, I think, more than anything.
And of course, the fact is, you've actually had poetry published.
I have, not very much.
Oh, come on.
But I've got a few published. Yeah, I've had some published by a couple of online magazines. One which is linked to Brighton University.
Oh, right.
And another one actually in America called Page and Spine, which I was really proud of.
And what inspires you to write poetry? Life?
Yeah, lots of things.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of what I do is go to writing groups or workshops or attend various courses, because even as a local writer, I'm never going to be the next J.K. Rowling, and I'm not sure I really want to be honest.
Oh, right.
I write poetry for the enjoyment and, you know, to get together with a group of people that have a similar mind, and we can share our experiences and, you know, the kind of writing that we like.
Yeah.
I join groups or writing groups or courses, and generally they'll give you a topic to write about, and it will spark something.
Right.
So it's very important, if you're actually writing at home on your own, as I did for 20 years on my own, and hid it away, you know, get along to a group or a short course, which is what I did, because it will open up a whole world to you. Yeah. of support and people with a similar mind, and that will appreciate what you're doing. You know?
And that's the great thing about going to writing groups and societies, is that you meet together, you all have one aim to write beautiful prose and poetry.
Yes.
And it's a great social thing as well.
Yes, it is. And I mean, I've met people who are not famous writers, but they've been asked by friends and relatives to write poems, you know, for special birthdays and things, and they actually get paid for this, you know. So people do make a little bit of money out of it. You can't make a living out of it, but it's more or less, it's merely really for the enjoyment, you know.
Yeah. Is it harder to get poetry published in the UK than it is, let's say, America?
I don't know enough about it, I have to say. What I can say is that from my own personal point of view, I've had more success in America than I've had in this country. Right. And I think that's because modern poetry in Britain tends to be quite graphic.
Right.
And I think mine is more of a romantic style, inspired by the Victorian romantics. So I think that's probably why. And I think my style probably suits the American audience better than the UK in some ways.
And of course, romanticism in poetry is just such a lovely word, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And, you know, a lot of modern poets, they don't follow that romantic style, and that's fine. You know, it's open to everybody, and you know, we want as many different styles as possible, and each one of them has a great deal, you know, to offer. It just depends on, you know, because my favourite literature is Victorian literature and this kind of thing, and Victorian poetry. I think that's probably why it inspires me the most, and that's the style that I do like, you know.
Now, of course, if you are inspired to write poetry, then I suppose really the best place would go to be one of these societies or functions that actually offer the people to write.
Yes.
You know, that's the inspiring thing.
It is. There's a number of them around the area. And in fact, the first course I ever went to doesn't exist anymore. It was the old Leeds University Centre at Middlesbrough.
Oh, right.
And I went along there on a 5-day course with a local writer called Cynthia Fuller, who is from kind of like the Peterlee area, somewhere around that region. And she was absolutely wonderful. And I actually met her about 5 years later again. Once the Leeds University Centre had closed down, she started working and lecturing at Newcastle University, and I went and did my postgraduate certificate there in creative writing. Wow. And she was one of our lecturers there, so I met her again, which was really lovely, you know. But Teesside University does offer quite a number of really good courses. Bob Beagrie and Andy Willoughby are two very well-known. They're local poets, but they are well-known nationally, and they've also done quite a lot of international work on the Russian underground, and also recently in Denmark. So they're actually international poets and very well-known. But they do a lot of courses at Teesside. They do the BA, the degree. They also do the MA, the Master of Arts. But they also do summer courses. If people want an introduction, they're a bit concerned about doing something at that level to begin with. They do summer courses which are really good, and I did a summer course with them about 3 or 4 years ago on writing and research, where you looked at the way that research can inform your writing and your poetry, and that opened another avenue to me, which I've used since, you know, so that was really good.
Well, that's the great thing about poetry, isn't it, is that you can write it for fun and for enjoyment,
yes,
but you can also do it for a living and, of course, gain a qualification, a degree.
Absolutely, and there are ways of making a living through poetry, but really what you have to do is do literature projects, either with children or with adults. You've got to get funding from some of the various foundations and charity bodies, which is what a lot of people do, you know. And another organisation in the area, in Stockton, that's based at the Ark, is Apples and Snakes, which is a national charity based on writing and performance poetry. And Kirsten Luckins runs that from the Ark, which is really good. Now, I haven't had time to go along there. I keep promising I will, and I will get there. It's on a Saturday, 1 till 3 usually. I think it's the third Saturday. But again, that's on the website, in the Apples and Snakes website.
Well, that's the great thing about Teesside, is that you've got the Ark in Stockton, you've got Mima and Middlesbrough as well,
yes,
all offering, Teesside University as well, all offering courses, or just if you just want to go along and find out more.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a lot of little groups as well. Over many years when I've taught creative writing to adults, and I do the beginner classes, you know, so what I will do is I will give them an introduction, and then if one or two over the years have come to me and said, do you think I'd be good enough to go to university? And I said, yes, without a doubt. Wow. And two of them have since, both of them have been published. One of them has won 2 or 3 competitions. So I feel quite privileged that I was there in the early days of their writing work, you know. But there's a local Redcar writers group called Redcar Women Writers Circle. It is for women only, and that's run by Kerry Shaw. And the next meeting for that one is the 21st of November, 1 till 3 in the library at Redcar. So that's a women's writers circle, which is quite new. It's only been going a couple of months. I do go to one at Saltburn, which are ex-students of mine. When the course finished, they wanted to carry on. So we got ourselves a group together and we meet up there once a month. So again, quite a lot of things going on around the area that people perhaps don't know about.
Yeah, of course, libraries are the best way to go to
Yes.
seek out poetry as
Yes.
well. I mean, Stockton Library do an absolutely fantastic sort of section with poetry.
Yes.
But underused, I think.
Well, they are, and the library is a great source, not only of books and things, but they have lots of activities going on for children as well, you know. In the days when I went to the library every Saturday morning as a kid, at the old Rosebery Square Library in Redcar, I was the only kid on a Saturday morning because it was a huge council estate. They've recently knocked it down and built a new estate there.
Oh.
I was the only kid every Saturday morning. In the days, it was a highly polished floor, and I had to creep along on my tiptoes, because if you went click, click, click on your heels, the older generation would look at you with a frown, you know, and it frightened me to death. It didn't put me off because I had a whole world there, but I was the only kid there on a Saturday morning.
They didn't used to like look at you and go, shh.
Absolutely, yeah.
Exactly.
You had to be silent in those days, yeah. They're much more friendly community places, and I think that's right, you know.
Okay, writing's poetry. Now, you've written some compositions?
Yes.
And we're talking childhood.
Yeah, I mean, this first one is basically an adult looking back at their childhood. And it's... I was talking earlier about they knocked down the estate where I used to live at Redcar. And it... Along with a workshop I did with Cherie Mack, who again works from Newcastle University, we were looking at childhood and memories. And this particular photograph sparked off a memory from a childhood that I had, and this is the result of it.
Okay.
It's called Hopscotch Track. I found my lost letterbox today when my childhood spoke to me. It passed its way through my back street. A long white chalk held in its hand. It drew the hopscotch track. I found my lost letterbox today in a monochrome photograph, jumping around the white chalk squares, ready to skip and twist and turn along the hopscotch track. I found my lost letterbox today, walking past my school. My chalk squares on the playground, fine-tuned to debris, rubble and dust. It covered my hopscotch track.
That is beautiful. It's because childhood is such a lovely subject, isn't it? To talk
Yes,
about.
it is.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a great wealth of material out there, but equally as well, poetry doesn't have to be boring or for clever people. There's a lot of very amusing poetry out there for children. And one of the things as a child I used to do was, I'm one of 7 children, the only one that's bookish among them all. And I used to hide in my bedroom with a poetry book and a magazine underneath it so they wouldn't know I was reading poetry. And if any of them are listening, this is an admission, I've never told any of them this before. And I can remember reading, the poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, in Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. And at 10 years old, I had absolutely no idea what it meant, but I knew that I loved the way the words sounded and the rhythm.
Yeah.
And that's what I used to do, you know. So if you can get children interested in amusing poetry, it might develop into something later, you know.
Well, that's it. It's all about inspiring youngsters, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
I mean, the fact is that, sometimes, especially when you're young, like, let's say, between the ages of, 7 and 10, if you get an interest in poetry, sometimes you can be labelled a bit of a geek, which I think is wrong. Absolutely wrong.
Yeah. What I've been quite surprised at over the years is how many people have admitted to me, actually, I read poetry as well. And I've written a few. Would you have a read of it for me, Joan? And quite a number of people have done that. And I think all it means, I think all it takes is for somebody to say, well, I love poetry and I do write poetry. It might not be very good, but I enjoy writing it. Right. And I don't care what you think.
And that's a fantastic attitude.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, if you go to, I've just been told in my left ear here, if you go to www.poetry.co.uk, you can actually find out events that are happening around the Teesside area about poetry as well. Now, you've written something else as well.
I have. This is called Sailing Away.
Lovely.
And this is actually based on true events from somebody who was a former student in my class. And everything that I've written in this poem is absolutely true. And It's called Sailing Away. Warm scones set on 2 plates. One for me, one for Mary. Fresh bread circles the kitchen, assailing my senses. She asked how I was settling. At night, Mary wakes up. She wets. She weeps. Next day, the other girls complained. That night, I climbed out of my window, shinned up the drain pipe and into the girls' dormitory. I snuggled in beside Mary until she slept softly, soundly. Sunday afternoon, the nuns came. They told us about Jesus. They asked if anyone knew the catechism. I recited it word for word. 3 smart-looking couples came, trying us on for size, taking one for the weekend. They chose 3 other children. We dirtied our faces, Mary and I. Each Sunday, the nuns came. We were taken on trips to the park, along the river. Navy and white sailors disembarked, whistling, marching jauntily. At 16, I rode the ragman's cart into the city and signed into the Navy and Whites, sailing away from the home for unwanted children.
That is, do you know you've got such a beautiful voice? I could listen to you all day, I really could. And that's one of the things that brings across the brilliance of poetry, is sometimes the vocal aspect as well.
Well, do you know, Clive, thank you for saying that, because I was very worried it would sound like one of these high-pitched fish-white voices. Beautiful. Because you can't tell your own voice, can you? It's actually quite hard. But that last line in that poem, The Home from Our Unwanted Children, this was a man that I met who was in his 40s, and unfortunately his mum died and they were taken into a home, and the brass plaque on the side of the children's home said Home for Unwanted Children.
Oh, wow. And the fact is that it could be just a sentence, or it could be just one word that provokes the written word, and of course provokes how people write about it, in the sense that, you know, it's well, it could be modern day living, it could be just little things that get the written word written, you know. And of course, I always say that it's great just to write it with a biro and a piece of paper.
Well, I have to say, if you saw my scribblings, nobody can read them. Sometimes I can't read them. And I've got lots and lots of scribblings, because one of the things that they tell you on the very first course that you go to is always keep a notebook with you, because you never know when inspiration strikes.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've even had a really funny experience. I used to have to go to a course at Durham, and I drove along the 177 because I really love that route from Stockton, you know. Even in the winter, I love that route. And I was actually driving along one spring morning, and it was when, you know, the hedgehogs come out of hibernation.
Yeah.
And there was a black car in front, short distance ahead. But when I actually got to the part that he just left, there was a dead hedgehog there, squashed on the road, and blood everywhere, bright red. But very oddly, in the field next to it, because it's quite rural, that part, as you know, a field full of bright red poppies.
Oh, wow.
And I haven't got it on me, but I had this line in my head at the time, and I'm driving along. You can't stop and write notes on that road, there's nowhere to pull over. No. So I had to repeat the line over and over again out loud until I actually got to the car park, and then wrote it down very quickly, because that, just seeing the, you know, the red and the poppies, it just said something to me. Yeah. And that was really odd, because it's the only time I've ever been. I can't get my pen and paper out, and it was really odd, you know.
And of course the fact is that if you are a poetry writer, it's as simple as a jotter and a pen. You know, the ideas come to you. Yeah. Simple as.
It does. I mean, actually, one of the things that people are afraid of writing poetry, and I'm teaching a course at the moment at a school for the parents of children in school. And one of the sessions we've just done, in fact, on Monday, is poetry. And the first thing I ask them is, how do you feel about poetry? And we get various sort of expressions, from rubbish to I'm frightened to death of it. Oh. And I say to them, by the end of this hour, you will all have written a poem. And they looked at me as if, like, you know, the moon is green, you know. And just took them step by step. And basically what I got them to do was write a little story.
It's inspiring confidence.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. Write a little story, and then from that develop the poetic lines, and that's really all you do. If you've got an idea in your head, write it down, and then shorten it into a poetic line, you know. And
of course, as I say, if you want to know more about poetry within Teesside, then of course it's www.poetry.co.uk. And any other forms of contact as far as getting to know about poetry?
In general, if you want to do creative writing, I would go on the Teesside University website, because they do short courses as well as the BA and the MA. There is also the Poetry Foundation, and if you actually sometimes I'll just Google poetry events or something. Facebook have a number of poetry events going on as well. If they actually put something into the search, something will come up. You know.
Right. Well, Joan, I could talk about poetry all day to you. As I say, you've got such an inspirational and a lovely voice. And yeah, go on. Oh, you want more poem?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes, of course. I do apologize. Yes, we're going to have one more poem from Joan.
I've asked you, Clive, this one because I have to say this is my personal favourite, and I'm not going to tell you about it. You being in the broadcasting business, you will probably know. But there might be people out there that don't, so we can actually explain it later.
Right.
And you'll know what it is. It's called Bill Black's Bass. Bill Black's bass was hot, but not as hot as the young man with the big beat, who sang and swivelled his way across the stage, feeling the rhythm and blues through every fibre of his body that was lean and mean, magnificent. Sensual devil music. Lock up your daughters, they said. Protect them from this evil that has crawled into the hearts and minds of our young, along with their identity and a right to belong. Parents prayed silence would follow. The old ways would be maintained. His voice opened the door closed to their generation. And just as Pandora discovered, once opened, it can never again be closed.
Wow.
And you will know from that, Clive, I'm a lifelong Elvis fan.
Fantastic. Yes, I got Elvis there. I did get Elvis there.
Yes.
And, of course, it's inspirational and it spans generations as well.
Yes.
And it doesn't exude in the sense of, like, you know, you can be as prolific as you want. And, again, I could talk about it all day. I really could.
Yeah.
I really could. Well, thank you very much for coming in and sharing your time here at Ignition Radio. Good luck with your works as well. And let's get something published in the UK. Yes.
Thank you very much, Clive.
I think we should. Well, there we go. And say, if you want to know any more, it'll be on our website. All the information you've heard today will be on our website, which is www.ignitionradio.co.uk. Thank you once again for coming in today. Right.